Good afternoon, and welcome to the Patron Screening and Weapons Detection Considerations webinar. We're so happy all of you could join us today. This has been a session that we've been wanting to put on for quite some time. It's been a hot topic around the industry and safety and security, so we certainly wanted to come together and discuss the topic together as a group. So as you can see, first off, I'm not Michael Finley. He's been managing and moderating several of these sessions over the past several months. He's done a great job, and I have big shoes to fill today. So certainly grateful for all the work he's been doing. So as part of the technology webinar series that we have here at NCS4, the goal of this webinar is to really discuss tools and technology and provide some information and insight on how you can best navigate some of those solutions out there and understand their impact in sports and entertainment venues. So this series is not intended to be product specific. We are holistically focused on patron screening solutions and technologies and the things we need to be looking at. However, to make this series possible, we are happy to have sponsors who are participating and supporting us. In this case, Patriot One is serving as a sponsor and a solution provider contributor to this session. So we're certainly happy to have them join us today. So again, before we get started, I really wanted to give you a kind of a feel for the platform if you're not familiar with it already. To the right of your screen, if you're on a desktop, you're going to see a questions option. We have a lot of people joining us today, and we can't talk over each other. So to field those questions, if you could, please click that option to the right-hand side of your screen at any point throughout the presentation. You can pose those questions. We will stop and take breaks throughout to, again, address those questions, hopefully get you some answers. If you're on a smart device, you're going to see a question mark at the bottom of your smart device. You can just click that question mark and pose your question there. We'll be actively monitoring them throughout the presentation. And again, we'll try our best to get to your questions throughout the presentation. For those of you that we can't get with today, we are able to pull those questions down, and we'll follow up with you in the coming days after we wrap up the presentation. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. If we could, I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers first, and then we'll dive into the content. So joining us today, we're happy to have Jim Mercurio. He's the Executive Vice President and General Manager at Levi Stadium, 49ers Stadium Management Company. We have Christian Lau. He's the Chief Technology Officer for the Los Angeles Football Club. And we have Peter Evans. He's the Chief Executive Officer for Patriot One Technologies. I'm trying to click next. There we go. So we're going to go ahead and get started with you, Jim. I have a couple of questions. I know several of you post questions as you were registering. We're grateful to those. We went through those questions, and we've tried to address as many of those throughout the presentation. But again, we also encourage you to ask questions throughout. But I do have a few questions I'm going to ask, starting with Jim. So I'm going to read from my list here. But the first question I have for you, Jim, is as with most venues, I'm sure your organization has spent a considerable amount of time, energy, and money to address public health concerns. So do you see these technologies and measures that you have in place at your venue, or do you see using these technologies after we return to some form of normalcy? Sorry, I got tongue twisted there, Jim.
Yeah, that's all right, Daniel. No, listen, I appreciate it, and good afternoon, everybody. Look, Levi Stadium was one of the stadiums that unfortunately wasn't able to host fans in 2020. With the announcement, though, yesterday of our schedule, and the NFL schedule just came out, we're 120 days from opening up and welcoming fans and really employees back in a full-time capacity. So it'll be challenging, it'll be exciting to reopen up to our customers and certainly to the faithful. With respect to COVID-19 policies and procedures, I do believe that there'll be some of the technologies that have been developed will stick around for a little bit. I do think it's a little bit of a short term. If you've been following the news, Levi Stadium has been one of the mass vaccination sites. We've already put over 250,000 needles in people's arms in such a great effort to get people vaccinated. Our county, our state has really embraced vaccinations as the key of pulling us out of this pandemic. But I do see some of the technologies or some of the simple techniques and policies, such as, temperature controls or temperature checks. Now, it's proven that it's not a precursor to having COVID, but there is some benefit to that. So, I think some facilities will still keep temperature screening as a potential option for a while because of the other aspects of it that it provides, not just for COVID-19, but we want people to stay home if you're not feeling if you're not feeling well. So when you got 3,500 people that you're employing on game day, trying to keep everybody safe and healthy, that's certainly one small way to do it. Do I see the technology of testing being prevalent for the next 5 or 10 years? I don't. Do I see it in the next 6 to 18 months? Probably, depending upon what region and what part of the state or what your county protocols call for. But having said that, some technology will be here. There'll be new technology that comes along that we'll have to kind of keep up with. But we're looking at the vaccination play in our facility.
Thank you, Jim. And I know that one was a bit of a curveball because it's hard to, I know you're not a fortune teller, it's hard to see when things are going to get back to some form of normalcy. But I feel like that question was asked quite a bit in registration. So we wanted to address it in some way here.
No, I think it's important though, Daniel. I really do. The other piece is, let's not just, sit and keep our blinders on and only focus about COVID-19. That's one of the things that this past year I've been trying to keep my staff focused. And anytime I do any of these calls or seminars, there are other things that we have to remind ourselves that are important. And patron screening is certainly going to be one of those. But all of the other aspects of our daily operations have to be kind of brought to the forefront and to the light again. Let's not just be COVID-19 centric, right? We have to figure out and be reminding that 70,000 people are going to come and not behave, and people are going to want to drink and sometimes not behave, and then you're going to have medical emergencies that you're going to have to be focused on, and your facility has to be cleaned and fully operational. So let's not just keep our blinders on COVID-19 as we peel back and open up for the 2021 season.
Absolutely. Great point and well taken. And speaking of other things, you mentioned patron screening. So I know you've been at the 49ers organization. You've been there for going on your 28th year now. During that time, I'm sure you've seen a lot in the evolution of patron screening. So before we start really diving into some of the technical stuff, can you kind of walk us through that evolution and what you've seen there?
Sure. Listen, you're going to take me back to the old stomping grounds of Candlestick Park, where, in the early 70s, really, and all the way up to 2000, really up until 9/11, most of your screening really was, if I can be candid, looking for people who were overly intoxicated and making sure they didn't come into your venue. And then 9/11 hit, and then we started moving into you had some, pat downs, or you had wands that you would, and technology that you would look for weapons, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is certainly today, and certainly after the attacks of 9/11. So you went in from, and I can remember this like it was yesterday, when we stood up what's called now the NFL best practices for safety and security, and we brought together professionals across the NFL and all the member clubs and started to talk a little bit about, okay, how are we going to safeguard against attacks? And it started with pat downs, and it was accepted back then that we're going to start putting our hands on people and provide technology or provide techniques on how to pat down somebody so that you weren't putting it in an inappropriate manner. But even still, that felt odd to a lot of us of having to go to that kind of invasive search. And then it moved into a pat down and a wanding kind of scenario. And then it went into magnetometers. And before we left Candlestick and made the jump at the Levi Stadium, that last year, we were, testing every piece of technology. And I do appreciate you making reference to the fact that I'm not here to endorse one over the other. And Peter, I do appreciate you sponsoring this too, and your stuff is great. But I don't want to get to the point to where I'm, seen as endorsing one or the other. But we had to look at, and that's probably one of the things I think on this call we can talk about, is how do you decipher the snake oil salesman from, the needs of what you and your company or your organization or your stadium or arena need. So we went from hand pat down to wands to now magnetometers. And when we opened up Levi Stadium, it was one of the first stadiums that went full magnetometers everywhere. And so now, and Peter will kind of talk a little bit about in his presentation, is showing the next level of movement along that technology. and I'm pretty excited to see what he has to say and some of the new technologies that we can employ. But it is absolutely critical that we maintain that that safety and security, and now melding it with guest services and customer experiences, so that their time in the line is not such that it is an uncomfortable experience for them. We want to get them through as quickly as possible, but we want to make sure that we are not compromising safety and security in doing that. And I think some of the new technology you see kind of points in that direction.
That's great, and certainly here shortly we'll start getting into some of those questions we need to be asking solution providers and technologies in relation to this patron screening technology. It's important to kind of understand the dynamics and how it's going to impact your organization and operations. But the next question I had, I know again you mentioned several pieces of technology or lack thereof if you're going way back in time, but the technology and how it's evolving. What are some of the concerns you have about some of these more sophisticated technologies that are making their way into the marketplace or into the industry?
Sure. So look, when we first started designing Levi Stadium, and we made the commitment to be, the most technologically advanced stadium in the country, or one of them anyway, and we've been recognized for that, for really pushing the envelope and using technology to our advantage. I also learned that sometimes, having technology for technology's sake is not your friend. Just because it's brand new, oh, we got to go get it and let's put that in our arsenal. I think before you start to do that, you need to recognize and understand what it is that you need to solve for. What's the issue or problems that you're looking to solve for, and then target that technology to help you solve those issues. So often I have seen where some of the technology things that you are been put in front of us maybe solves one piece of the problem, but now it creates a whole bunch of other issues, right? So let's take facial recognition, for example. There is still a number of companies that are doing great and making great strides in facial recognition, but you've got the community and the public that is just not fully embracing that yet, as well as they should. Facial recognition can be used in so many different ways to prevent and in some cases predict incidents from happening. But some people think that it's too much of a invasion of privacy. And so that balance and that education, I think facial recognition companies have more and need to take more opportunities to explain to the general public of why it is successful and why it can be protective, and how you can still serve in such a way that creates the balance that I think is necessary with technology. The other piece I would say is, again, can you make that technology or use that technology to solve the questions and issues that you have without creating a bunch of others? And I think that's where, for me, you'll start to see where AI will start to come into play here a lot more, where you can see how that technology will now play a stronger role, I think, in the next couple of years, or at least in the 5-year spectrum.
Fantastic, and you've touched on some of this, but I'll go ahead and ask it because I did have the question. If you were to have, and we're certainly not nearly done with you, Jim, certainly we'll have you chiming in throughout the presentation.
Sure.
But the last question for you before I kind of get into Christian and asking some questions of Christian, what recommendations might you have for practitioners that are seeking patron screening technologies? I know you mentioned a couple things, but did you want to elaborate a bit further in that area?
Sure. Well, one, I would say use industry standards as a guide. Webinar series like this, Daniel, I think is great. The NCS4 has really been on the cutting edge of trying to understand the technology that comes out ahead. But I would use your personal and professional resources. What I'm doing in San Francisco might be different than what somebody's doing in New York or Miami, and share that content. One of the things that I always say is, we don't need to be competitive in this field, right? The bad guys are coming after us too regularly, and for us to worry about how I'm doing in San Francisco or what somebody's doing in Atlanta, and we're not sharing each other, I think we're doing a complete disservice to our industry. So and not just within leagues, right? So look at what baseball is doing and pay attention to what the NFL is doing and what basketball may be doing, or soccer, or college sports, and really try to integrate as best you can, because there's no reason we should be competitive in terms of what strategies that we're using. We really should be raising all boats when we're discussing technology and strategies and procedures, being mindful all the while that we don't want to be too out front, that the bad guys understand what it is that we're trying to protect against, right? So I guess what I would say in a nutshell is, try to involve yourself as best you can with some of the industry leaders, similarly to what NCS4 is doing. There's a whole bunch of others that I won't promote because this is your platform, but look around and tap into the industry leaders, and industry leaders share your information with your colleagues, and I think you'll find that we're in a much better place.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And we've had several discussions. Always encourage you all, if you do have a good case study, or you went out and demonstrated or conducted a demonstration with technologies and you have feedback that you want to circulate and share. We do a lot of work with just pulling down Department of Homeland Security resources and trying to get those out. We do the same thing with your lessons learned and your experiences. So at any point, if there's things that you think would benefit the rest of the industry, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to be able to circulate and educate people. All right, well, thank you so much for that piece, Jim. We're going to go ahead, and I know we have a question. Let me pull this question up real quick. All right, so we have a few questions, and like I said, we'll for the sake of timing, I just now got the signal. For the sake of timing, we'll hold questions until we start getting toward the back end. But thank you for answering those, Jim. We'll go ahead and hand it over to Christian to get his piece started. All right, so Christian, I have a few questions from you that came in. How are you doing today?
Cool.
Doing
great. Daniel, how are you?
I'm doing well. So the first question I had, I knew your organization's heavily focused right now on biometrics and facial recognition. So I wanted to see if you'd kind of speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, for us, Face ID, face identity is kind of formulating our strategy around the guest experience and eliminating friction, coming into the building primarily, and then getting them customers into concessions quickly, right? It's all about efficiency. Our primary focus on face actually was pre-pandemic. We did a pilot with Ticketmaster and Clear, who's our identity platform partner, around face identity. And we did a pilot back in 2020. We actually got 2 matches into the season using facial recognition tic-keting, and it worked pretty well. And then of course the pandemic hit, so we've kind of had to slow that down a little bit. But for us, it's, first of all, just to be clear, it's an opt-in, right? We're not forcing anybody to do Face ID. But the idea is, for ticketing, getting them to the building quickly, and then you factor in, a system kind of like, what Patriot One has, that allows a natural walk into the venue, right? So you're not having to divest things out of your pockets or go through bags, using magnetometers or wands. We really just, like a lot of venues experience, you always have a late arriving audience, especially in Los Angeles. You've got folks that come in late, and so we just want to get people into the gates as quickly as we can. And then on the other side of Face ID is concessions. So age verification and payment is a key focal point for us, just because it does eliminate, the long queues in line, which has been a challenge. We actually received permission from the state of California to do biometric age verification back in 2019, and we were going to roll that out last year. And of course, once the pandemic hit, everything kind of was sidetracked. But we expect to have a full face identity platform, frictionless experience for our customers. We'll see if we can't get that done this season, but definitely for 2022.
That's fantastic. You kind of touched on some of the other questions I had for you, but that's great, Christian. Thank you so much. Another question I had was, you kind of mentioned to kind of forecasting into the future with patron screening. So, how do you envision the stadium entry in the coming months and years as we start to evolve into some of the new patron screening technologies and solutions that are becoming available?
Yeah, so it's, it's going to take some time to evolve. But, digital tickets is a start. Bank of California Stadium's been digital tickets since our inception. So NFCs are our primary focal point for ticketing today. And so you factor that in, plus, facial recognition, facial ID ticketing is something that we're working on now with our, we have an ecosystem of partners that we're working with, from the identity platform to the turnstile partner. And so we're building out what that stack looks like, and to, got to be a little bit vague on it, but we'll have Face ID ticketing available at all of our entry points and all lanes in the future. And whether that happens this season or in 2022, any patron that's coming into the venue will have the option to use their face. And then we're also working on the idea, right now we'll be launching it here in a few weeks, because one of the use cases that's been a challenge is if you have, a family, for example, or a mid-sized group, 5 to 10 people, and they're all coming in on one account, right? One Arctics account for Ticketmaster. So we'll have the ability to tear tickets en masse, right? So basically you would be able to use your face, Daniel, you would walk up to the reader, and then it will actually count up to the number of tickets that are in your profile. And then the turnstile will open for that number of people, and then we let them through. And so we're working on those types of efficiencies to get in front of, edge cases where you have challenges with that type of system. And that also would work with NFC ticketing as well.
Absolutely. And you mentioned some things about frictionless screening. Is there anything else you want to add about kind of your plans and moving to a frictionless customer experience?
Yeah, for us, it has everything to do with getting people into the gates as quickly as possible. And the reason for that, honestly, is, we want our per caps to go up. We want people to be transacting at concessions, buying, beer, buying pizza, whatever it might be, and not waiting online to get into the venue, right? And so you think about concession operations, we want that to be as highly efficient as possible, just for the throughput. And then we're also looking at options for retail as well, which is a little bit different. But ultimately, we hope to have a touch-free Face ID customer journey for all of our operations where transactions are involved.
Absolutely. And I had a couple questions I'll go ahead and put out to the group. Jim and Christian, I think these might apply to both of you. But the first question I had is we have a lot of families coming into venues, and we have, again, a lot of families that are spending the majority of the day at the venue. So what are some of the priorities to kind of make sure fans have that sense of safety at our venues for this upcoming season? Is there anything you might be able to share in how we're really trying to provide that experience in a safe way to those families and individuals that are participating?
I can go, Christian, if you'd like. Listen, it's no different to me. The element of safety and security, it's no different than it was prior to the pandemic, or in terms of our commitment to safety and security. It's really the primary importance to us. In terms of though getting them into the building, that's one of the reasons why we've really focused on how much time in the line, and Christian talked about this too. You want to get them in as quickly as possible. It's not only from a business perspective that you want that. You got to remember that the biggest threat in some cases is an explosive detonating outside your gates, right? So as you got a crowd that is out in front of your gates, that's equally as concerning to me than it is if it were inside, right? Or somewhere near another gate or an entrance or an exit. And so that's one of the reasons why we really focus on that buffer zone protection and the NFL best practices you see. That's why it's been designed that way. That's why you see the throughput trying to get as quickly as possible, so you don't have this big amount of mass people out front of your gates because the screening is taking too long or your ticket scan is taking too long. I would venture to say, with this new technology that's coming down the pike and getting everybody into the building, your shift is going to, or your backup is going to shift from your mags or your magnetometer search, your bag search, if some people are still doing them nowadays, to your scanning. It's going to take more time to get people to scan for the very reason Kristen talked about with our digital. With 4 people on the phone, you're going to have to, quickly kind of move those people. So the more, what I would say is be mindful of what your staffing levels look like now at your ticket scanning, as opposed to not just your magnetometers. They're equally as important. Your backup is going to start now at your ticket scan. So making sure you can push those people through is not just a business decision, although I'm with them, I want my per caps to go up as well, but that minimizes the risk of exposure for somebody that wants to do us harm at our gates.
Fantastic.
Yep.
I'm sorry, did you have anything to add, Christian?
No, I was gonna say Jim's absolutely right. We don't really talk about like the threat of, explosives, those types of things, but he's absolutely correct. That's one of the kind of like underlying things that we focus on, is making sure that all of our perimeters are as safe as they can be, and so there's a whole protocol around it. But beyond that, so we've been open at Bank of California Stadium for a few weeks now. We have 20% of our audience in attendance, right, per state and county guidelines, and we'll be moving up to 67% on May 22nd. And so, as you have, fans coming back into the venue, not a whole lot has changed. I mean, yes, you have, hand sanitizer, there is social distancing, and we've got vaccinated sections coming on the 22nd, which allows us to get to a higher capacity. But most of what you're going to see is not much different than it was. And, we looked at this last year because we played our season without fans. But as we started to look at some of the technologies that aligned with, the pandemic response, and then you start to survey your customers, you realize quickly, like, the customers don't want any of what we were talking about, right? When you think about checking temperatures and testing on site, these types of things, customers just want to get back to normal as quickly as they can, right? And so we're trying to do that in a responsible way, because we do need to make sure that people are safe and healthy. And so we've got protocols to follow. We've got, next level, it'll probably the cleanest venue. And I know Levi will be the same. Like, probably you can eat on the floor, to be honest, because of the things that we're doing. But you're not going to see a lot of noticeable changes, because we're trying to get back to this pre-pandemic concept, right? Which was normalcy. And that's what customers want.
Absolutely, thank you. And I know we have a couple more questions. We'll hold some questions until we get to Peter, and we'll hear from Peter, talk to him a little bit before we get to some of these. But I did see a question, great question, by the way. We're talking broadly about some of these national level things that's happening in professional venues, and this isn't really a question to the group, more of a statement on my part. If you guys want to chime in, absolutely encourage you to do so. But the question looks like we're hearing from a school district in this case, and we're talking about what is affordable to them. So we actually will, in this presentation, get into budget, get into affordability, get into some of the concerns that you have. Obviously, the focus of this session is really on the technology. As part of this series, we're focused on kind of the technology, where it's evolving, and trying to educate people on what questions they should be asking. But certainly being able to scale up and down based on your budget, what's available to you. I know Peter's got a couple slides and some information we'll be able to share in that regard. And then we'll get to some of these other questions as we start getting into it. We had questions about non-metallic hazards. We'll get into kind of the considerations surrounding those and different types of sensors and technologies that can be deployed with some of the modern technologies. But again, great questions. Please keep them coming. Anything from the group before we move forward?
Daniel, just to that question about budgets and Levi Stadium, it has all this technology. That's not necessarily available to me. What I would argue is as often and as much of this technology that starts to become normal and gets in place, certainly costs they start to come down. But there are several techniques that, as operators and schools certainly are in that boat, who are always struggling for money, that don't cost a lot of money. And so what I would really do is get with your local law enforcement and whoever is running your security operations, for example. Things like minimizing door entrances and then swelling up for certain times and pulling back down, or techniques that really don't cost that much money. But how you use your infrastructure can be a friend to you. And understanding who's coming on your campus and when, and visitor management systems aren't that expensive. And there's ways that you can kind of do all of those. And maybe there's something that the NCS4 can kind of, invite those folks into, Daniel, that conversation, and where we can kind of have a seminar to talk about what kind of techniques are there. But it's not always about money, and it's not always about technology, although technology is not cheap. There are very simple strategies that can be deployed to secure your venues much better than maybe we have with or without technology, I guess is what I would say.
And from our end, we are a resource to the industries, to the sports safety and security realm. So if you are looking for those resources, please don't hesitate to reach out. A lot of times we have a checklist, or we have a best practice, or we have some information. We work with gentlemen like Jim and Christian and the rest of the crew on a regular basis. So a lot of times we've been just kind of stockpiling a lot of that information. So please feel free to reach out. We'll get that to you if we have it available. And if we don't, we'll try to get you some information that can help you along the way. Training, education, resources, checklist. That's exactly the types of things that we try to make available to everyone who needs them. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you do need any of those things. All right, so with that said, thank you, Jim, Christian. We're going to go ahead and continue. And at this point, Peter, you should be able to take control, and we'll hand it off to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Christian, for excuse me, joining us today and inviting me to participate too. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I'm going to pick up on a couple of things today, just talk a bit about sort of considerations in a broad sense and what that means in terms of questions to be asked, of your vendors as you start to evaluate different solutions for patron screening and patron security. And those start with the issues of friction and the balance that we always have, and something I think that Christian, you and Jim both talked to. What is the right level of protection for your business environment, and how do you understand things like balance and flexibility, and where the industry is, helping, and where the industry is potentially doing a bit of a disservice, and so how to cut through some of that fog and find out what the real answers to the questions you're looking for. So let's jump right in quickly so we can get to the questions quickly. When I look at kind of the industry overall, I've been in cybersecurity for many years. I've been in physical security for many years. And what strikes me here is there's always this friction that occurs between like marketing organizations and security organizations, right? And I think, in fact, you alluded to this a little bit, Jim, when you talked a bit about some of your experiences and the prevalence of different forms of protection, right? On the one hand, we want to accelerate. We want to give a better customer experience. We want to get more people into the stadium faster, right? Be fast, frictionless. And that's been a mantra that's been around for 20 years, right? We want to create differentiated value and a positive experience and get people to the concessions lines quicker. Oftentimes, though, those marketing-driven activities are often at the the behest of or challenge to security. If we look in the cybersecurity world, you'll see companies like Marriott, Target, Equifax, and others who all were accelerating things that they were doing online, right, to create a better customer engagement profile, better customer experience, but they did it so fast they got ahead of their security headlights, and therefore they had a noticeable hack. The same sort of things are happening, I think, in physical security, and what we're seeing from most of our customers and the people we engage with is it's a challenge. We want to provide the fast, frictionless experience, but as Christian said, there's other considerations that have to be brought in so I don't lose security. On the flip side, I don't want to be so focused on security, particularly with the environment that we're in right now. There's a bit of a crisis going on in terms of weapons, right? That I'm creating an experience that just keeps people away from the stadium. Most often, people are looking at this as an either-or situation. But with the right application of things like you talked about, Jim, around AI, you can actually solve for both and do both very, very well, right? If you think this through. So the first question I'd be asking any one of my vendors is, what do you prioritize? What tools and capabilities and flexibility do you have in your platform so I can actually maximize and optimize, right, both sides of this equation instead of, foregoing one for the other, okay? When I think about kind of the next sets of questions here, this was actually, let's go back to the question we just asked by the school board, saying, look, we need to have a degree of protection, but we're budget limited. There's all kinds of both solutions you can provide with looking at your operations, as you were saying, Jim, but there are other technology approaches. Simple example, most schools have cameras in them today, right? Laying software on top of that using the existing system that will do weapons recognition at a distance or fight and crowd recognition at a distance will probably solve 85% of the risks at a very, very low cost. And unfortunately, when you look at things like what happened in Boulder, Colorado, or the gentleman who took weapons into the retail stores in Georgia, or the event that actually happened right here in Austin, Texas, a month or so ago, those videos show that weapon was out in the open, and it could have been detected long before an incident occurred. So there are other solutions that are more cost effective. When we kind of think about patrons' experience and patron security in balance, marketing and the security activity, what we think about is there's all sorts of different sets of information. I think as Christian talked about this with people, purchasing tickets online, right? The patron experience starts long before they enter the stadium. It's not just about the gate, right? There's actually insights that you can gain about who they are, what their interests are they a VIP, are they intending to do something malicious at your venue before they even arrive? And you can start to use things like facial recognition to actually identify those individuals when they get within 100 feet of the building. So there's a set of integrated solutions that can be brought together. Now, let's not forget that the main thing has to remain the main thing. And that's actually providing a positive patron experience and patron screening and security upon entry into the building. And Jim pointed out an interesting thing about, well, so you get into one line and do kind of your screening for security for weapons, but then you're immediately in another line for ticketing, and then immediately potentially in another line for alcohol, right? And this is something that's very prevalent in the NCAA environments that we've talked to. And so you start to think about patron screening as not just three separate siloed things, but how do I create an integrated solution that actually enhances the customer experience in a much more of a multiplier way, right? And with the same platform, you can do these sorts of things. So ask your vendors about what is their vision for a more holistic approach as opposed to just a singular application for a singular thing. When I think also about, whoops, I'm sorry there, let's try that again. There we go. So let me talk a little about AI. And Jim, I'm gonna have a little fun with what you were talking about AI, if you don't mind. You're saying that some of these new platforms actually, leverage AI. You also use the word snake oil too, so let me have a little fun with that too, okay, if you don't mind. I think there's a little bit of a disservice that companies who have AI have actually delivered to the industry and to the customers. I had a fascinating conversation with a gentleman the other day and said, does your system include AI? Yet he didn't know what AI stood for or how it would be used. I'm almost expecting to go to the grocery store one of these days and buy a big box of Tide detergent. And it goes, now with AI or now with machine learning. So I think marketing organizations are kind of doing a disservice to the industry by kind of overhyping the value of AI. There's a lot of companies who failed with AI. The way that AI really works is you have 3 layers of capabilities. You have to have access to data that's appropriate to the application you're looking to perform. So in the case of something like Christian's application, we talked about the family coming in, I need the data associated with those individuals. If I'm looking to do crowd management, I need data about crowd management. If I'm looking to protect against weapons, similar thing. Then you've got the AI engine that's creating actual intelligence out of it. And then you've got the software on top of it that's making that intelligence consumable and in the hands of the security individuals so that they can actually do something with it intelligently. Most companies fail in this. And they talk about their AI engines without really understanding how it has to be application specific and it has to have certain access to certain information. So be careful. Be careful of the snake oil AI folks. And when someone says now with AI, push them, prod them. How does that apply to your unique business problem? Because your problem in one stadium will be very different than a problem in another stadium or another venue or a theater. So let me talk a little bit about the platforms. And again, I'm going to pick up on something Jim said when he was talking about the evolution between pat downs to hand wands to things like that. Okay, I'm going to use an analogy here. If I think about the cell phone, right? We all probably remember the flip phones from way back when. They were great, made phone calls. You could text, but you had to press a button 3 times to get the letter C and things like that. But it was a valuable tool at that time. Along came the first smartphone. Was it perfect? No. Didn't have a camera in it. It only let you surf the web, do texting, maybe get your personal emails. There was no Google Maps, there was no Snapchat, there was no Instagram, nothing like that, right? But it was more valuable than the flip phone. And so a lot of people kind of migrated from one to the other because they were getting onto a new platform. Just in the same way that you start thinking about, for example, getting on from one type of computing device to another computing device, or you move from CCTV cameras to IP-enabled cameras because you can get so much more intelligence out of them, and then the ecosystem starts to develop much more value. So when I start thinking about the smartphone today, it always amazes me when I go book a reservation on a flight, it comes in my email, it's immediately put on my calendar, and then Google Maps is immediately giving me directions to the airport, and I haven't done anything. Right? This ecosystem is integrated and it's grabbing value from each other to kind of advance my experience and make my experience that much better. Okay. So if I think about that in terms of what is happening in the industry and the questions you then need to start thinking about for your application, there's walk-through metal detectors out there today, right? And those work well for the application, but they're sort of getting towards the end of the life. They're a standalone element, just like a flip phone. Right, where we're seeing as an industry with the next generation of patron screening technology is products that are AI enabled, but AI specifically for the application of enhancing the customer experience while enhancing the security screening capabilities. Okay, now is it perfect? No. Can I get 3,000 people through it and I have a 98% detection rate and a 1% false positive rate? No. The state of the art in the industry is not that. And we're going to talk about balance in a moment and why you need to understand these questions and ask them of your vendor to make sure you're not overemphasizing one number at the risk of the other. 3,000 people through, fantastic, but you're probably going to put security at risk and you need to find that balance. But the platform itself, like the smartphones, is creating a new platform onto which you can actually continue to enhance your experience and start to do more things like we saw on the other charts, such as integrating things like social media feeds that are presented, probably telling you that there could be a negative event that people are planning for to create some disruption, right? So you can now start to integrate this information. Very similar to what Christian was talking about integrating ticketing, health scanning, and all these kinds of things, so you can actually run your stadium much better. So let's talk a little bit now about balance, okay? We get this question all the time. So let's start with dusting off your high school calculus books. If you guys remember differential equations, we're going to start there today and go through a little bit of training. The questions you really need to really probe with your vendors here is not just asking the question, well, what's my alert rate? What's your detection rate? What's your throughput? Because there is no answer to those questions unless you're taking all of those plus other inputs at the same time into calculation. You know, Jim talked about the idea of throughput. It's very, very important. Let's get people into the stadium faster so I don't have a soft target for a bomb. Okay, but if I get them in fast, am I still getting the right detection rate such that I'm actually capturing weapons? Do I lower my efficacy of my security if I'm moving them through faster? And maybe that's different for one gate in Jim's stadium than it is for one gate in Christian's stadium. Very different environments, very, very different flow of people. One NFL stadium might look very, very different from the others. So, you know, what we typically like to do is work with the organizations to understand what their security operations profile looks like and what they need in order to find the sweet spot. Alert rates, detection rates, throughput rates, security operations. You know, does an organization actually have the security individuals staffed in the right place in the right way so they can actually do something when they get the alerts? And let's not be fooled by people saying, oh, you can reduce 70% of your security guards. No, because most stadiums actually redeploy that staff for other functions necessary during the game. So make sure that you're not being given kind of the just singular data points without understanding how they integrate with each other. Similarly here, environmentals, and at the end here, of course, patron experience, right? What is the patron experience that I'm looking to have, and how do I offset that versus some of these inputs to the equation? The other thing here is, like, there is no one size fits all. As I mentioned, every statement is very different. So what the questions you need to ask your vendor is, what's right for me, right? And if they can't take you through that equation and do that analysis on each piece part, they're probably not ready to actually deliver the kind of solution you're looking for. You're actually probably going to get just another walk-through metal detector. This little chart on the side here is showing an example of an EMI spike. So you can imagine a stadium that has electric streetcars going in front of it, or a lot of elevator banks. All these things throw off electromagnetic interference, right? I was talking to one stadium, and they actually had placed the walk-through metal detectors on a VIP bridge, and that thing would vibrate every time a truck went through. Every time it vibrated, they got false positives, they backed up the line, bad customer experience. Understanding the environmentals and understanding these kinds of things like EMI spikes, and then being able to tune your AI to whitelist those out so that you have a great customer experience while maintaining security are the kinds of things you need to be looking for. Jim also talked, I think, about the NHL safety standards, right, that were set in place. The DHS Safety Act, making sure you're IP65 rated so you can actually move these devices outside if you want to do an outside event, right, like a tailgating activity, or around your stadium or your theater or other locations. There's different standards that are very important to ensuring that you're meeting certain requirements of safety, right? So all in all, the element of this chart is there is no one size fits all. And so having a product that is very flexible, that's very mobile, that can adjust, and that has the ability to be enhanced over time as your business model changes over time, and you use the venue and the stadium for different types of applications. We also like to talk a little bit about things with different customers. Some people want, walk-through metal detectors because they are a visual indicator that there is a weapons detection protection system here, and it will send people away. Other people are looking for things that are very covert. I don't want it to change the aesthetic of my theater, for example, because I have a very opulent theater and I want these things to look like they're part of the furniture, but they're making sure they're providing the security required. So these kinds of considerations are the things that we think about when, and that we encourage all of our customers to ask, and any stadiums to ask when you're starting to think about what's right for me. So don't get stuck in just the one size fits all. So ultimately, the point here is about a great customer experience, but making sure we're not doing that at the risk of security for the business. That's kind of what I've got here, Daniel, today. Some quick observations. Questions?
Absolutely, thank you. And I have several questions. I'll start off with a couple. One of the first ones I had was coming off of kind of the tail end of some of the things you shared. You had the list of different considerations when people are looking at products and technologies. Now, one of the things that was asked was how are we handling, or how are you handling, how are some of these advanced patron screening devices handling smaller weapons, such as knives, box cutters, etc. And also, we have some venue representation here. If there's anything you want to add from kind of the venue's perspective on these things, that would be a really nice conversation.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, and I invite Jim and Christian to jump in also, but it's fascinating to me how different venues and even different leagues have different standards that they're adhering to. Some are absolutely on the page of, we will have no knives, or at maximum, it'd be a small, like 1.5 inch blade knife and anything smaller, but nothing larger than that. Others are okay with, well, knives are okay, but no guns, right? So it depends on the stadium. It also depends on, even within a particular league, you'll find one stadium has one sort of standard, another doesn't, because it's based on what's the norm in that city, for example. If 100% of people are carrying knives, good chance you're going to have a stadium that wants to protect against that. The state of the art of the industry today is, and I'm going to do a little bragging, we're down to very small knives. We can catch those, but, and the qualifier there is, you really, again, have to think about what my detection rate is, how much I'm going to turn that up, right? So I can get down to those smaller knives. These things have to trade off my detection rate versus the quality of thing that I'm going to detect, and what that might do to my alert rate and what that might do to my throughput rate. So again, can small knives be captured? Absolutely. But let's look at each environment and balance that with throughput, detection rates, those sorts of things.
I think he's absolutely right. I think it really comes down to your own facility's risk assessment, right? And what your tolerance level is, because there is that balance that you have to strike. I'm going to be one that says, I just don't want to compromise any safety or security. And not to suggest that somebody has a different standard than me wants to, but that's kind of my mantra. So you'll see, well, maybe you won't see, because this is really, we don't talk about it too much, what our levels are and what rates are. But if you look at, for example, we're CHEA mags, and you hear about the other folks wanting to use this 2B setting, which is the new setting that kind of allows for a better throughput and kind of hits on metals, maybe not all knives or smaller knives. what I'm talking about is raising the level of awareness and effectiveness and raising all boats. And so for me, that's your minimum. So if you can start there and move upwards, I think we're all in a much, much better place. We're going to be a little bit more aggressive than that in our screening. But again, there's other technology and other resources that you can use that kind of help determine what your potential risks are or your threats. You could use all the other information, whether it's Ticketmaster data or if it's season ticket holder data or if it's Clear or other things that have vetted certain people. That's what you're seeing at the airline industries, right? You're seeing people with Clear go through a little bit faster that don't have to go through that secondary screen or that primary screening as often as others may have to. So it's all about risk assessment, and I think it has to be an individual choice. I would argue do everything you can not to compromise any safety and security. If it means you have to bring in a couple extra mags or other new technology to avoid that backup, that's what I've done, right?
Yeah.
I've opted for a higher standard and more lines, so I avoid the problem with throughput. Others may not have that space, they may not have the budget, they may not have the time.
Yeah. And if I could pick up on that, Jim, I just want to pick up on something you said. It's talked about like getting more insights on the individual, right, with things like Clear or other things, right? Again, that comes back to, the proper use of pragmatic AI, where you can start to integrate with Clear, you can start to integrate with social media feeds, you can start to look at things like crowd behaviors outside your environment that are early predictors of this could be a risk. Now let's get a higher level of alert, right? So, I was talking to a gentleman at one of the Triple Crown races. A year ago, they had, no attendees to the event, but they had a huge issue with all of a sudden 200 people showed up with weapons trying to disrupt the race, and it was a protest because of the Breonna Taylor killing, right? And so there was early indication there of that issue. And they could have adjusted their security accordingly for that day because of that early indication with the integration of that knowledge into their overall patron safety and patron experience platform. So, early indication, I think, is a really good point from you, and then how you adjust your systems accordingly to find that balance is a great point.
Absolutely. And I know we have a lot of event-specific measures depending on who's going to be there, what events taking place, track records, those types of things. But just to kind of hit on it one more time, I know it sounds like kind of the consensus is, yes, we can pick up small knives. We can pick up small knives, but at the end of the day, that depends on our threshold and the settings we have. The sensitivity, as that goes up, naturally throughput's going to decrease. And if we decrease that sensitivity, we start allowing some of those things in, but the trade-off is increasing that throughput. So it's really a cost, well, I'm sorry, I say cost benefit, but it's a risk threshold, what you're willing to take in and how important that throughput number is to you. Would that be accurate?
That's a fair way of putting it. And what you're going to find with every venue, just as Jim was saying, every venue is going to be a little different. So there is no one size fits all. You're going to find one venue is going to have a higher throughput rate at that same level to catch those small knives. Another might have a higher rate. It really is a little bit venue dependent because of the environmentals and other considerations.
Mm-hmm. All right, and this next question, I'm going to start off with Jim on this one. It's come up in a few different formats throughout the live session, and I do realize that we are getting close to the top of the hour, and several of you have just enough time. Your schedules are pretty tight, and we absolutely will continue recording. We'll answer some more questions, but we absolutely understand if you do have to jump off, and we definitely thank you for your time and the energy you put into attending with us today. And hopefully, we hope that you gain some knowledge and some information from the session. And we encourage you to reach out should you need anything or should we be able to support you. So we are going to continue the question for a few minutes. We won't stop at the top of the hour. It's not a hard stop, but we will start wrapping up shortly thereafter. So the next question that came up in a few different ways, starting with you again, Jim, we have some of these whether it's whether you have alcohol sales and people, you still have those alcohol restrictions, what's coming into your venues, or it's just a non-metallic threat to your venue. How are we still looking at those things when we start talking about metal detection and patron screening technologies?
Well, I mean, it's really no different. Again, we're looking at it the same way. It's a threat that you have to assess and eliminate as best you can, right? With respect to alcohol, you've seen so many different new. I hearken back to my days at Candlestick where it wasn't technology at all, but here I saw we were giving away 70,000 seat cushions, and operationally it was one of the most interesting dilemmas I ever had to face and figure out how to do it. And we allowed them to take them back in, for after every game. And I see some guy carrying his seat cushion, and I'm just thinking, God, something doesn't look right. Everybody else's seat cushion is flapping in the wind. His is dangling straight down. There was no technology I used. It was just my eye and my experience to say, hold on a second, come over and talk to me. And inside of it were 6 of the coldest Bud Lights I've ever seen in my life, right? Took them right out of the can, cut out the seat cushion, stuck him in there. It worked as one of those coolies. And it was ingenious what he was trying to do. But if you look at all the different things that people are trying to do and bring into our facilities, and if you think you're going to catch them all the time, you've got another thing coming. There are technologies that'll help us along that way, but it's still good old-fashioned kind of police work, as I'll say, that you can't let go of. So don't think that technology is going to be your end-all be-all. But it is important that all of those types of things that you're looking at factor into your screening. So if it's metallic and it's getting through your screening, you have to look for other things. You got to look for nonverbal clues and other kind of things in your training toolkit that train you and your security folks, and not just security, by the way, anybody else for that matter that's working for you on game day, with a trained eye of who's coming into your building and what seems odd. Don't be afraid to go up and ask them for it and engage with them.
That's such a great point. And yeah, certainly you can't forget about the training, education, and the experiential portion to all of this. We actually we were having conversations with a venue just a couple of weeks ago, and walk-through metal detection, the evolution of patron screening is something they're absolutely looking at deploying, but they also understand kind of their manpower requirements, their operational requirements, and they do serve alcohol. So for them, it's the comment they had was, we can absolutely increase our throughput. We can eliminate bag searches for those ferrous metals, but we're still going to have to search bags. We're still going to have to look at people to make sure alcohol isn't making its way into the venue, to make sure some of those non-ferrous metals aren't making their way into the venue, to make sure that we're still upholding the safety and security standards that we've had set for years now.
That's right. You're absolutely right.
All right. Peter, did you have anything to add to that? I didn't mean to cut you off if you did.
Well, I think you guys covered it very, very well. And again, what we see, coming back to the analogy of the flip phone, going to the smartphone and the platform, having more and more capabilities. Once you've got these advanced sets of sensors in there, you can actually start doing things like ticket scanning within the same platform. You can start doing things like alcohol in bottles, probably more liquids in bottles and things like that. You start to create more and more integration, right? Such that you eliminate, 1 line, 2 lines, 3 lines. Now it's just, one set of, entries, and people are just walking through. Now that's ultimately, let's call that's the iPhone 10 vision, okay? But we're on that journey as an industry, and I think that's a good thing for the industry, ultimately a good thing for both increased safety and security as well as increased patron experience.
Yeah. And we've had several questions, different types of threats, whether it's explosives or chem bio, or just different types of threats that are out there. And we talk about the evolution of patron screening. Now, traditionally, we have the walk-through metal detectors, we have the technologies and the processes and procedures in place at gates and at these ingress points. But as it relates to all of these different types of threats that we're dealing with as an industry, what types of protective layers do we have? And I want to say that, Peter, you kind of alluded to it earlier on when you talked about having scalable and having scalable solutions that can ramp up based on your threat level, being able to incorporate and integrate different technologies, being able to pick up on some of those things that aren't just a traditional metallic threat, but also other threats that ultimately we have to be mindful of. Can you elaborate further on kind of what that looks like from a technological standpoint?
Yeah, I think from the technology point of view, obviously when you're starting to think about bombs and bomb making materials and things like that, right now I think the state of the art really is very focused on like detecting the kind of metal and the shrapnel that's kind of in there. There are technologies out there that are starting to look at things like, for example, sniffing for opioids, sniffing for heroin, sniffing for these kinds of things. But I don't know that the state of the art is actually something that is ready to deploy en masse. Certainly not as an integrated platform. Is the industry getting there? And is it starting to work on it very aggressively? Yes. And that comes back to the same idea of like, can you create the platform first, which you can then, as those different technologies mature, you start to bring it into a singular platform.
Absolutely, and I come from the CBRN realm. That was kind of where I cut my teeth in CBRN response. And I'll say that a lot of that, the technologies that are deployed are dependent upon the event type that's taking place, the threat facing that venue. There's a lot of active intelligence that's collected leading up to an event, and a lot of the security measures are determined based on those threats. I mean, a Super Bowl will very likely have some added measures and some different measures than what a typical Sunday game might have. Certainly something to be mindful of. So with that said, I know we're just past the hour now. And there are still some great questions coming in. We are capturing those questions. I'll make sure to get those over to our panelists. We'll try to reach out to you. We'll try to get you answers to those questions in the coming hours and days. So with that said, I mean, do you have any closing remarks? I'll kind of go around the room. Starting with you, Peter. You're the first one I'm looking at on the screen here.
Yeah, well, thank you. Daniel, I think like my closing remarks is, we're on to a new kind of generation of technology. It's in its early stages, but it's proving effective. And so, hopefully that there's more people looking at the technologies and they can, again, use it to, enhance that overall patron experience as people start to return back to the stadiums. As Christian was saying, they move from 10% to 20 to 67% and so on. It's a perfect time to start thinking these things through.
Absolutely. Thank you. Jim, you're next on my list here. Do you have anything you want to close with?
Well, first, let me say thanks for the time, and I hope it was worthwhile for those that are tuning in. A couple things that I guess I would say to be mindful about looking forward. You saw it here just recently with the cyber of the pipeline and the effects that it's having on the country. I would anticipate, and others should anticipate, cyber to continue to be an issue for all of us. Don't lose sight of the low level kind of attacks neither, right? Where people are still, in these times cutting into boxes and stealing copper, and how that affects your systems as a result of somebody breaking into that. And lastly, I would say focus in on, false narratives, right? Messaging and as a concern or a threat as it relates to security, as it relates to bio, as it relates to the next potential pandemic. Those that want to do us harm are going to drum up whatever they can to try to disrupt our way of life and our quest to get back to some sense of normalcy. So I think there could be that kind of threat, that PR, cyber message, dare I say, fake news kind of stuff that will cause people to panic and to go, as you saw, running up and filling, gas up with water bottles and plastic bags. I mean, don't do that stuff, right? So you just you gotta be mindful of that. There are people out there that are purposely disseminating that type of disinformation to see how, as a people, we're going to respond. And that's just on the world stage. When you take that to your venues, the same could be said for that too. And so having a strong communication platform, how to address and how to recover in the event that you get that, is equally as important of your security strategy as, say, patron screening would be.
Absolutely, thank you. And Christian, I actually just got your message. I know you've got a meeting you've got to get to. Is there anything you want to close with before we lose you?
No, I would just ditto what Jim and Peter said, and just embrace the technology, be open to new ideas. At the end of the day, it's very fluid, and so I think some things will stick and others may not. Some things are ahead of their time, but eventually it all comes around.
And I'll add before we wrap up, there's a tremendous amount of resources and guidelines and checklists that are being developed just for the purposes of patron screening right now. I know there's a lot of great organizations within the federal government working toward it. There's a lot of private organizations, public institutions, as well as solution providers that are trying to come together and help us formulate some good guidance and information that we can disseminate out to you. So please stay tuned. We're going to continue trying to put those resources together, make them available to you. And if there's anything we can help along the way, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, we are a resource center first and foremost. So if there is anything we might be able to help you with, we would love to have a conversation and see how we might be able to do that. But again, thank everyone so much for your time today. Thank you, Jim, Peter, Christian. We just lost, but a big thank you to him as well. And thank you everyone for entrusting us with a bit of your time this Thursday. Have a great rest of the week and safe and enjoyable weekend.
Bye now.